Adam woke before the alarm, the dull gray light of early morning slipping through the thin curtains. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight settle on his chest. It wasn't physical, yet it pressed down on him as if something invisible was sitting there, reminding him of everything he wasn't. Before he even realized what he was doing, his hand reached for his phone. The screen lit up his face, and within seconds, the comparisons began. Someone had bought a new car. Someone else had announced a promotion. A smiling couple stood in front of a house they called their dream home. Each image felt like a quiet accusation. Adam didn't feel anger toward them, instead, he felt a slow-burning disappointment in himself. He wondered how everyone else seemed to know exactly where they were going while he felt like he was walking in circles. As he got ready for work, his thoughts kept racing. He remembered being younger, full of ideas and confidence, believing that his life would unfold in a clear, powerful way. Back then, he didn't measure himself against others. He measured himself against his own curiosity and dreams. Somewhere along the way, that changed. Comparison had crept into his life so quietly that he hadn't noticed when it took over. It turned every success into something small and every mistake into proof that he was behind. Even when he did something well, the satisfaction faded the moment he thought about someone who had done more. At work, Adam sat at his desk, staring at the screen without really seeing it. His colleagues talked about their plans, their achievements, their future goals. He nodded and smiled at the right moments, but inside he felt disconnected, like he didn't belong in the same conversation. He finished his tasks, but there was no pride in completing them. He told himself it didn't matter because someone else could do it better anyway. That belief slowly drained his motivation. It wasn't that he lacked ability, it was that he had stopped believing his effort was worth anything. During lunch, he sat alone, replaying moments from his life that now felt like missed opportunities. He thought about paths he hadn't taken, risks he hadn't dared to take, and dreams he had put on hold because they didn't seem impressive enough compared to others. The more he compared, the smaller his own life felt. He didn't realize that he was measuring himself using someone else's ruler, one that had nothing to do with his own values or struggles. That evening, Adam met Daniel, an old friend he hadn't seen in years. Daniel looked confident and calm, the kind of person who seemed comfortable in his own skin. As they talked, Adam felt the familiar sting of comparison rising again. Daniel spoke about his work and the progress he had made, and Adam listened, feeling like every word highlighted the gap between them. Finally, unable to hold it in anymore, Adam admitted how tired he was of feeling left behind, of constantly questioning his worth. Daniel listened carefully, without interrupting or judging. When Adam finished, Daniel said something that caught him completely off guard. He confessed that there was a time when he had felt exactly the same way and that he had once compared himself to Adam. He talked about how destructive that habit had been, how it had stolen his confidence and joy. The turning point, Daniel said, came when he realized that comparison was a trap. It promised motivation but delivered only frustration. The moment he stopped comparing and focused on his own path, things began to change. Those words stayed with Adam long after they parted ways. That night, lying in bed, he thought about how much energy he had wasted looking sideways instead of forward. He wondered what his life might look like if he stopped measuring himself against others and started paying attention to his own growth. The idea felt uncomfortable, even frightening, because comparison had become a habit, almost an identity. Letting go of it felt like stepping into the unknown. The next morning, Adam caught himself reaching for his phone again. This time, he paused. He felt the urge to scroll, to check, to compare, but he resisted. Instead, he sat quietly and asked himself what he actually wanted, not what would impress others. The answer wasn't clear at first, but the question itself felt powerful. Throughout the day, he noticed how often comparison tried to pull him back in. Sometimes he gave in, and sometimes he didn't. Each small moment of awareness felt like a tiny victory. Over time, Adam began making small changes. He set simple goals that were meaningful to him, not because they looked good from the outside, but because they aligned with what he cared about. He started working with more focus, not to prove anything, but to improve his own skills. Progress was slow, and there were days when doubt returned loudly, telling him he was still behind. But now, he recognized that voice for what it was. He reminded himself that life wasn't a race with a single finish line and that everyone was running on a different path. As weeks passed, Adam noticed a shift inside himself. He felt lighter, more present. Other people's success no longer felt like a personal failure. Instead, it became proof that growth was possible in many different forms. He began to appreciate his own efforts, even when they didn't lead to immediate results. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud of how far he had come, not compared to anyone else, but compared to who he used to be. One quiet evening, as Adam reflected on his journey, he realized something profound. The pain he had felt for so long wasn't because he was lacking, it was because he had been constantly telling himself he wasn't enough. The moment he stopped comparing, he gave himself permission to grow at his own pace. His life hadn't suddenly become perfect, but it had become his. And in that realization, he found a sense of peace and strength he had been searching for all along. Adam woke before dawn, long before the city began to stir. The room was quiet, yet his mind was already loud. Thoughts rushed in without asking permission, reminding him of everything he believed he should have achieved by now. He lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling a tightness in his chest that had become familiar over the years. Almost automatically, his hand reached for his phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, and within seconds, he was scrolling. Faces smiled back at him from places he had never been. Announcements of promotions, engagements, and milestones filled the screen. Each image carried a silent message that only he seemed to hear: "You are late, you are behind, you are not enough." He sighed and put the phone down, already exhausted before the day had even begun. As he got ready for work, memories surfaced of a younger version of himself. Back then, Adam had believed life would unfold naturally if he worked hard and stayed true to himself. He hadn't worried about being first or best. He simply wanted to grow, to create, to feel useful. Somewhere along the way, that quiet confidence had been replaced by constant comparison. Without noticing, he had begun measuring his worth through other people's achievements. Every time someone succeeded, he felt smaller. Every time someone struggled, he felt temporary relief. It was a cycle that never truly satisfied him. At the office, Adam moved through his tasks like a machine. He did what was required, nothing more, nothing less. His co-workers discussed their plans and ambitions, their voices filled with excitement. He smiled and nodded, but inside, he felt detached. He believed that no matter how hard he tried, someone else would always be doing better. That belief drained his motivation more effectively than any failure ever could. When his manager praised his work, Adam dismissed it in his mind, telling himself it wasn't special. Comparison had robbed him of the ability to enjoy even his own progress. During lunch, he sat by the window, watching people hurry past. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. He wondered if they, too, felt the same quiet insecurity or if he was the only one carrying this invisible burden. His thoughts drifted to the dreams he had once held close. Writing, building something of his own, making an impact in a way that felt meaningful. He had postponed those dreams, convincing himself that others were more talented, more prepared, more deserving. Comparing himself to people he barely knew had become an excuse to stay safe and small. That evening, Adam met Daniel, a friend from years ago. Time had changed them both, but Daniel carried a calm confidence that immediately caught Adam's attention. As they talked, Adam felt the old habit creeping in again. He compared his own life to Daniel's words, his posture, his sense of direction. Eventually, the weight of it all became too heavy to hide. Adam admitted how lost he felt, how comparing himself to others had drained his energy and self-belief. Daniel listened without judgment. When Adam finished, Daniel surprised him by sharing his own struggles. He spoke of years spent feeling inadequate, constantly measuring himself against others, and always coming up short. He explained how that mindset had nearly broken him. The turning point, Daniel said, came when he realized that comparison was a distraction from the real work of becoming better than his past self. He didn't stop caring about growth. He stopped letting other people define what growth should look like. Those words stayed with Adam. Later that night, lying in bed, he reflected on how much of his life had been shaped by comparison. He realized that he had been living as if life were a competition with limited winners. That belief had made him rush when he should have learned, and hide when he should have tried. He wondered what might happen if he stopped looking at others and started paying attention to his own path, even if that path was slower or less visible. The next morning, Adam made a small but intentional choice. Instead of reaching for his phone, he sat quietly for a few minutes. The silence felt uncomfortable at first. Without the noise of comparison, his thoughts were clearer. He asked himself what mattered to him right now, not 5 years from now, not compared to anyone else. The answer wasn't dramatic, but it felt honest. He wanted progress, not perfection. He wanted to feel proud of his effort, even if the results took time. Throughout the day, Adam noticed how often his mind tried to fall back into old habits. A coworker shared good news, and his first instinct was to compare. This time, he paused and congratulated them sincerely. He reminded himself that their success did not take anything away from him. That simple shift felt powerful. It was as if he was slowly reclaiming pieces of himself that comparison had stolen. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Adam focused on small, consistent actions. He worked with more intention, learned new skills, and allowed himself to be a beginner again. There were setbacks, moments when doubt returned and whispered that he was still behind. But now, those whispers no longer controlled him. He understood that growth was rarely visible in the moment and that comparing his behind-the-scenes efforts to someone else's highlights was deeply unfair. One evening, Adam looked back on how far he had come. Not in terms of money or status, but in clarity and peace. He noticed how much lighter he felt. Other people's success no longer triggered resentment or shame. Instead, it reminded him that everyone's journey was shaped by choices, timing, and circumstances he could never fully see. He had stopped chasing someone else's life and started building his own. Adam realized that comparison had never been about motivation. It had been about fear. Fear of failing, fear of being judged, fear of choosing a path that didn't look impressive. Letting go of comparison meant accepting uncertainty, but it also meant freedom. Freedom to move at his own pace, to define success in his own terms, and to appreciate progress that only he could truly understand. His life didn't transform overnight, and challenges still appeared. But something fundamental had changed inside him. He no longer felt like he was running late in someone else's race. He was finally walking his own path, step by step, without constantly looking over his shoulder. And in that quiet focus, Adam discovered a sense of purpose and peace that comparison had kept hidden for far too long. Adam stood at the bus stop as the city slowly came alive around him. Cars passed, people rushed by, and everyone seemed to be moving with purpose. He watched them and felt the familiar ache rise inside his chest, the quiet belief that everyone else knew where they were going while he was simply drifting. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and without thinking, he checked it. More updates, more achievements, more reminders of lives that looked fuller and faster than his own. He told himself he was happy for them, yet the comparison crept in instantly, whispering that he was falling behind once again. On the bus ride to work, Adam stared out the window and thought about how often he measured his life against others. It wasn't something he had chosen consciously. It had grown slowly, fed by images, conversations, and expectations he never questioned. Each comparison chipped away at his confidence. He used to believe that hard work would naturally lead him where he needed to go, but now he felt trapped in constant self-evaluation. No matter what he achieved, it never felt enough because someone else always seemed to be doing more. At the office, Adam went through the motions. He completed his tasks carefully, yet without enthusiasm. Praise from his manager felt empty, and criticism felt heavier than it should have. He compared his progress to his colleagues, wondering why their growth seemed faster and smoother. He didn't know their struggles, the nights they doubted themselves, or the sacrifices they made. All he saw were the results, and he used those results as proof that he wasn't good enough. During a quiet moment, Adam remembered a time when he had felt proud of small wins. Finishing a project, learning a new skill, helping someone without expecting anything in return. Those moments used to matter to him. Now they barely registered. Comparison had changed the way he saw himself, turning his own journey into something that felt constantly delayed. He wondered when he had stopped trusting his own pace and started chasing someone else's timeline. After work, Adam took a longer route home, hoping the walk would clear his head. The evening air was cool, and the city lights flickered on one by one. As he walked, he reflected on a recent conversation with an old friend who had spoken about finding peace by focusing inward rather than outward. At the time, Adam woke up to the sound of traffic outside his window, the distant horns blending into a dull rhythm that matched the heaviness in his chest. For a few seconds, before his mind fully woke up, there was peace. Then reality rushed in. Thoughts lined up one after another, reminding him of unfinished goals, delayed dreams, and the uncomfortable feeling that life was passing faster for everyone else. He reached for his phone without thinking, and as the screen lit up, the familiar cycle began. Photos, achievements, celebrations, smiles that looked effortless. With every scroll, Adam felt smaller, as if his own life was shrinking in comparison. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, wondering when exactly things had started feeling this way. There was a time when he had woken up excited, curious about what the day might bring. Back then, he didn't need validation from others to feel motivated. His progress, no matter how small, felt meaningful. Somewhere along the way, comparison had replaced curiosity. Instead of asking what he wanted to learn or improve, he kept asking how he measured up. That question followed him everywhere, quietly shaping his choices. On his way to work, Adam watched people through the bus window. Some looked confident, some stressed, some lost in their own thoughts. He realized that he knew nothing about their struggles, yet he constantly assumed their lives were better than his. He compared his behind-the-scenes doubts to their public moments of success. The comparison was never fair, but he kept doing it anyway. It had become a habit, almost an addiction, even though it left him feeling empty every time. At the office, Adam focused on his tasks, trying to ignore the noise in his head. He completed his work carefully, yet there was no sense of accomplishment. When someone else received praise, his chest tightened. When someone talked about future plans, he felt pressure rise inside him. He wasn't jealous in the way he once thought jealousy looked. He simply felt inadequate. As if everyone else had received a map to life and he had somehow missed the instructions. During a quiet moment, Adam thought about the dreams he had placed on hold. Not because he no longer wanted them, but because he felt they weren't impressive enough. He had convinced himself that if his progress didn't look extraordinary, it wasn't worth pursuing. Comparison had raised the standard so high that he was afraid to even try. Failing privately felt safer than failing publicly. But deep down, he knew staying stuck hurt more than the risk of moving forward. That evening, Adam sat alone in his room, the lights dim, the silence heavy. He replayed conversations, memories, and moments where he had doubted himself unnecessarily. He realized how often he had talked himself out of opportunities simply because someone else was already doing something similar, or doing it better. He had treated life like a competition where only the top performers deserved to continue. In doing so, he had forgotten that life was meant to be lived, not ranked. The next morning, Adam made a quiet decision. It wasn't dramatic, and it didn't come with instant confidence. He decided to stop punishing himself for not being somewhere he was never meant to be yet. Instead of reaching for his phone, he sat still for a few minutes, letting his thoughts pass without judging them. The urge to compare was still there, but he didn't follow it immediately. That pause felt small, yet powerful. Throughout the day, Adam practiced noticing his thoughts. When comparison appeared, he didn't fight it aggressively. He acknowledged it and redirected his focus. He reminded himself that progress didn't have to be loud to be real. He began setting simple goals that only he would measure. Goals that focused on effort, learning, and consistency rather than outcomes. Some days went well, others didn't. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't quit on himself after a bad day. As weeks passed, Adam noticed changes he hadn't expected. He felt more present in conversations. He worked with more intention instead of rushing to keep up with imaginary deadlines. When others succeeded, he still felt a twinge of comparison, but it no longer defined him. He started understanding that someone else's success didn't mean he was failing. It simply meant their journey was unfolding differently. There were nights when doubt returned strongly. Nights when Adam wondered if he was fooling himself, if he was settling instead of striving. During those moments, he reminded himself why he had started. He wasn't trying to escape growth. He was trying to escape constant self-judgment. He learned that growth without self-acceptance only leads to exhaustion. True progress required patience, honesty, and kindness toward himself. One evening, Adam looked back at the past few months and realized how much had shifted internally. His life wasn't perfect. He hadn't achieved everything he once dreamed of. But he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The pressure to constantly compare had loosened its grip. He no longer felt like he was running late in someone else's race. He was walking his own path, at his own pace. Adam understood now that comparison had never been about improvement. It had been about fear. Fear of being unseen, fear of choosing wrong, fear of trusting himself. Letting go of comparison didn't mean giving up ambition. It meant redefining success in a way that didn't destroy his self-worth. He accepted that his journey would have pauses, detours, and slow seasons. And that didn't make it less valuable. As he moved forward, Adam carried this understanding with him. He stopped asking if he was better or worse than others. Instead, he asked if he was being honest with himself, if he was learning, if he was growing in his own way. And with each step, he felt lighter. For the first time, he wasn't chasing someone else's life. He was finally living his own. Adam woke up just before sunrise, the room still wrapped in half-darkness. For a brief moment, there was calm, the kind that exists only before thoughts begin to speak. Then his mind started its familiar routine. It reminded him of where he thought he should be by now, of the years that felt wasted, of the people who seemed to be moving faster, living better, achieving more. His chest tightened, and without even thinking, he reached for his phone. The screen glowed softly, and within seconds, he was scrolling. Promotions, weddings, new businesses, smiling faces framed by success. Each post carried an unspoken comparison, and with every swipe, Adam felt a quiet sense of failure settle deeper inside him. He sat up slowly and put the phone down, staring at his hands. There was a time when mornings didn't feel like this. He remembered waking up with curiosity, even excitement. Back then, he didn't need proof that he was doing well. The act of trying had been enough. But somewhere along the way, his focus had shifted. Instead of asking himself whether he was learning or growing, he had started asking whether he was ahead or behind. That single question had changed everything. It had turned life into a scoreboard where he always felt like he was losing. As he got ready and stepped outside, Adam watched the city wake up. People hurried past him with purpose, or at least that's how it looked to him. He assumed they were confident, certain, successful. He never considered that they might be carrying the same doubts he was. Comparison had trained him to see only the surface of other people's lives and